We had a stupid habit, my wife and I. A dangerous one. We never bothered to lock our apartment door. At first, it was something we laughed about. We'd come home tired after work, throw our keys on the counter, collapse on the couch, and forget. The next morning, one of us would notice the deadbolt still undone, and the fight would start. "You were the last one in!" "No, it was you." It became a running joke, a who's the bigger scatterbrain argument that filled the silence at breakfast. But underneath the laughter, there was always that flicker of unease. Because deep down, we both knew. One night our carelessness might cost us everything. It almost did. The first warning had been harmless enough. One summer night, a draft from an open window slammed the door wide open at 3 a.m. The sound was like a gunshot. My wife woke up screaming, convinced someone had broken in. I had to run down the hall in my underwear, slam it shut, and assure her it was nothing. She didn't calm down until dawn. After that, we promised each other to stop being careless. But old habits cling to you like cobwebs, and slowly, the lock was forgotten again. That night, though, something gnawed at me. I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, restless. Finally, I gave in to the obsessive little voice in my head. Go check the door. It was ridiculous. I knew I'd checked it earlier, but the thought drilled into my skull until I finally swung my legs off the bed and padded down the narrow hallway. The apartment was silent, save for the hum of the fridge. I reached the door. My hand twisted the knob, and my stomach sank. Unlocked. Again. Cursing under my breath, I turned the deadbolt 4 times. On impulse, I also slid shut the bottom lock, the one we never used. For some reason, the motion felt like drawing a final line in the sand. I had just turned away. When I froze, something brushed against the door. At first, it was faint, almost imagined, like something soft, damp, and slippery sliding slowly across the wood. The sound came again, wet, dragging, deliberate. And then, for just a second, it was as if someone had shaken a plastic jar half filled with rice. A dry, rattling clatter. Out of place. Wrong. Then, slap. 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 As if bundles of soaked rags were being swung lazily against the door, my blood went cold. The air changed. It was subtle, but undeniable. The hallway grew damp, clammy, like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in an instant. I drew a shaky breath and gagged. The air smelled wrong, musty, rotting, like the heavy, suffocating odor of an old cellar that hasn't been opened in decades. I stood frozen, staring at the thin rectangle of wood and metal that separated me from whatever was on the other side. The sounds continued, wet, dragging strokes across the door, as though someone or something were feeling it, searching its surface. The slaps of fabric followed, uneven, unhurried, not fists, not knocking, something stranger. My first instinct was to look through the peephole, to confront whatever was out there with my own eyes. But as I took a single step forward, dread gripped me like a fist around my spine. I couldn't. Something inside me screamed that if I looked, I would regret it forever. Behind me, sheets rustled. "Why are you up?" my wife whispered drowsily from the bedroom doorway. Then she saw my face. The question died in her throat. I raised a finger to my lips, signaling her to stay silent. Her eyes widened. In an instant, she understood. The two of us stood in silence, staring at the door. As the sounds grew clearer, wetter, hungrier, each stroke and slap echoing through the apartment, like the slow beating of some diseased heart. And the smell. God, the smell. The longer it lingered, the more it seemed to seep into my clothes, my skin, my lungs. I don't know how long we stood there. Time seemed to stretch, each second pulled like string until it threatened to snap. All I knew was this: someone or something was right outside, inches away, testing the door. And for the first time in my life, I thanked God for that bottom lock. I remembered something, a gift we'd barely touched. When my wife and I had first moved into this apartment, my father-in-law gave us a cheap security camera. For peace of mind, he'd said, patting my shoulder. I'd smiled politely, plugged it in once, and then forgot about it. Who really wants to stare at grainy black and white footage of a boring hallway? But that night, God help me, I remembered, and I couldn't stop myself. The sounds hadn't stopped. Wet strokes against the wood, slaps of fabric, a low, dragging scrape, like something heavy brushing along the walls. The smell of damp earth and mildew hung thick in the air. My wife stood frozen in the hallway, clutching her robe tight to her chest. Her eyes shimmered with silent tears. I crept to the desk, powered on the computer, opened the feed. The image flickered to life. Green and gray. Night vision. And I wished immediately that I hadn't looked. Something was there. It swayed in the middle of the hallway, draped in black rags that hung like rotting seaweed. Its head was bound tightly with filthy cloth, layer upon layer, like someone had wrapped a corpse before burial. The whole figure bent at wrong angles, twitching and jerking, as if its bones weren't fastened the way ours are. Its arms, Jesus, too long, thin as sticks, ending in hands that dragged on the ground, fingers like knives, twice, no, 3 times, longer than they should have been, scraping lazily against the walls. It wasn't just standing, it was listening. The figure cocked its head to each door, pressed the wrapped mass of its face to the peepholes, lingered there, like it could drink the air from inside. Then it shuffled to the next apartment, dragging those cloth-wrapped limbs behind it, sniffing, scratching, testing. When it reached our door, my lungs locked. The thing leaned close. The fabric around its head stretched, as if something beneath was pressing outward. One long, bony hand caressed the lock I had just turned, fingers twitching across the metal. And then the sound came again. The wet strokes, the slaps, but not constant. It started, then stopped. Silence, then again. Dragging, slapping, scraping. Each cycle sent a new wave of terror through us. With every return of that sound, my wife cried harder. She pressed her hand over her mouth, then the edge of her robe, anything to muffle her sobs, her body shaking, and me. I prayed, mumbled words tripping over each other. Half-remembered lines, broken syllables, again and again, faster, harder, as if my stuttering prayers alone could hold the door shut. Then, with a horrible slowness, it pulled something from its rags. A toy. I recognized it instantly. A baby's rattle. It shook once. The faint jingling carried through the hallway, echoed against our door. My wife gasped, clapped her hand over her mouth. Her knees buckled, and from the bedroom came a sound that turned my blood to ice. My son. He should have been fast asleep, but when I ran to the doorway, my stomach dropped. He was sitting upright in his crib, eyes closed, mouth curled into a dreamy smile. His tiny hand was raised, stretching toward the hallway, toward the front door, though it was 2 rooms away, and he was murmuring, softly, rhythmically,
Booty, cootie, booty, cootie.
Again and again, like a chant. I staggered forward, whispered his name, tried not to let my voice shake. My wife appeared behind me, pale as paper. She stared at our child as if she didn't recognize him. The thing outside shook the rattle again. Once. Deliberate. Our son's hand twitched higher. His smile widened, eyes still shut tight.
Booty, cootie.
My wife pressed her face into my shoulder, sobbing silently. I could feel her nails digging into my arm through the fabric of my shirt. I looked back at the monitor. The figure hadn't moved away. It crouched close to our door now, head tilted, trembling, listening. Those grotesque fingers drummed against the wood in jagged rhythms, impatient, eager. It knew. It knew there was a child inside. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, to throw myself against the door and drive it back. But the thought of making a single sound rooted me in place. The smell grew stronger, thick enough that I thought I might choke. Damp cellar air filled my mouth with its sour taste. On the screen, the figure leaned closer, its rag-wrapped head pressed to the peephole. Inside, my son giggled in his sleep.
Booty, cootie.
The rattle shook again, just once. The sound rattled through the thin apartment walls and froze every muscle in my body. On the screen, the figure leaned harder against our door. The cloth around its head bulged outward, like something inside was pressing to break free. Its long fingers hovered over the lock I'd turned moments ago, twitching, testing, sliding back and forth along the metal, as if searching for a weakness. I couldn't breathe. My son's chant continued behind me, each syllable soft, innocent, unbearable.
Booty, cootie, booty, cootie.
Every time the words left his mouth, the figure outside seemed to tremble in recognition, as if it were answering a call. I backed away from the monitor, terrified that even the hum of the computer fan would give us away. My wife crouched in the hallway, her hands clamped over her ears, tears streaking down her cheeks. The apartment was silent. Yet the silence was worse than any noise. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. The thing stayed at our door. It didn't knock. It didn't speak. It simply waited. And I realized, with a sickening twist in my stomach, that it wasn't going anywhere until it decided to. Minutes crawled into hours. Time lost all shape. At some point, my son stopped chanting. He lay back down, still asleep, his little face calm and empty. But the figure remained, hunched at the door, unmoving, patient. Every so often, it shifted. The sound of cloth dragging along the wood made my skin crawl. The smell of the cellar seeped deeper into our apartment, clinging to the curtains, the carpet, our hair. I knew we'd never wash it out. I pressed my forehead against the wall, whispered prayers I hadn't said since childhood. My wife rocked back and forth beside me, silent sobs shaking her shoulders. We were trapped. And then, the first pale threads of dawn seeped through the blinds. On the monitor, the figure twitched violently, convulsing like a puppet with cut strings. It dragged its limbs back, shuddered, then crawled toward the stairwell. The rags slapped wetly against the floor as it retreated. The smell faded with it. The air warmed. By the time the sun crept over the rooftops, the hallway was empty. For a long time, we didn't speak. What was there to say? At last, my wife broke the silence. Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. I'm not staying here with the baby. Not one more night. I looked at her, saw the terror in her eyes, and I agreed. But then the weight of reality pressed down on me. We had just moved into this place, signed the lease, paid the deposit, spent weeks arranging everything. Breaking the contract would mean losing thousands, money we didn't have to spare. The thought of it gnawed at me, as much as the memory of that thing in the hallway. How unfair it felt, that survival came with a price tag. Yet I already knew the answer. No money in the world could outweigh what I'd seen, what my wife had seen, what had reached unseen for my son in the dark. We would lose the money. We would break the contract. We would leave. Because if we stayed, the next time I might forget the lock. I still wonder what would have happened if I hadn't turned that second key. Would we have been found in pieces, blood soaked into the carpet, or huddled in the corner, faces frozen in masks of terror, hearts burst in our chests? Or worse, would my son have risen from his crib, eyes glassy, smiling, whispering that awful rhyme? As he walked into the hallway to join it, I don't want to know. So listen to me. Take this seriously. Lock your doors every night, every time, because sometimes the line between your family and the dark isn't a wall or a weapon. It's just one small piece of metal between the lock and the thing waiting outside. And once it finds the right door, it never forgets where the child lives. And one more thing. Do yourself a favor. Get up right now. Go to your front door and make sure it's locked. Thank you for listening. Leave a comment, subscribe, and make sure your door is locked before the next story arrives.